4,500 years ago, two brothers, sons of the pharaoh Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid of Giza, were stranded on Australian shores. The princes came to make contact with people recognized across the world as the most spiritual of all, the first Australians. There is a high probability that the first Australians were the earliest seafarers to circumnavigate the globe. New scholarship, sacred sites and artifacts now revealed by Australian native elders demonstrate that Aborigine people had the necessary skills in shipbuilding and, most importantly, in astrocartography and therefore navigation. Disaster befell the two princes. Apparently their boat was wrecked and the elder of the two, Prince Nefertiru, the much-loved spiritual leader and scribe, was bitten twice by a snake. A traditional Egyptian remedy failed to save him. His body was mummified and interred within the outcrop. The sad story is recorded in Proto-Egyptian hieroglyphs, long assumed to be the work of a crazy farmer. Nobody believes the glyphs are genuine, so fresh do they seem. Only recently has a former sites officer who first saw the glyphs in the 70s spoken of huge stone slabs covering the entire area. Most of the roof structure has now either fallen or been deliberately destroyed. But there's a much older story, in glyphs unusually reversed. Researcher Stephen Strong found a clue in the text of the Book of Thoth, or Hermes. Thoth explains that he uses reversed glyphs as a code to conceal an esoteric inner meaning. Now the real story opens up. According to highly respected Dunghutti elder, Uncle Reuben Kelly, godlike figures came in a spaceship, turning into crystal form as it hit the Earth's atmosphere and blew up, showering down smaller spacecraft. These are clearly shown, complete with figures obviously sitting at a control panel in adjacent glyphs. The entire Kariong area is well known to be a site of frequent UFO sightings. The subject of UFOs is one we approach reluctantly, but as every day passes, evidence grows. For now, we sit between 95 to 99% certainty that UFOs are a part of this story. The story will continue in part 2 as we explore how the myths of deep time become the realities of the present.
What I think we've got in here is we've got two different stories, and I'll show you the story that is what I think is the most recent one, and this relates to the travels of two brothers, Nefer-Djeb and Nefertiru. And this story tells us about the fact that one of those brothers was bitten twice by a snake and died. Now within here we've got the cartouche for Lord Djeb. We've got all this section here seems to be a story about what actually took place. One of the glyphs a lot of people have used as proof that this is fake is this particular glyph here, and they say, look, it's a dog's bone in a square. Well, that actually is not that. It is actually legitimate. It means my lot, and the question here is this my lot? Because they complain in this wall about being stranded, because they actually the ships were tied down in the bay down there and they couldn't get back home, so they didn't expect to get back home at all. So a lot of this wall on this side and on the other side relates to basically the travels and obviously the tragedy that took place with these people who came to this place. But that's one part of the story. There's another part of the story which I believe is much older. And if I can refer maybe to this particular glyph here, which is one of many, one of the complaints made about this was that some of the cartouches, like these two here, should not be next to one another, and that this particular glyph here has been reversed. And the claim has been made, and of course David will talk about this and has spoken about it, that Sydney Uni did this. Now this one is actually reversed. There's no denying that. The head should be on this side, the foot should be on that side, and of course the funeral couch there should be reversed. Now we think that glyphs like this one and quite a few others, but not all, are actually from a much more ancient record that took place. And we suspect that record has been melded into the two brothers story. And I know that I've looked at the actual accounts, and you can break them up and you'll find there's a whole section of this story that's been translated where in the middle of it, there's no mention of funeral, no mention of names, no mention of place, and it becomes very esoteric. And we suspect that is a different story. And to that end, the clue for us are the UFOs, the UFO icons. Now there's one just beside here, there's one just here I can point out now, this particular one here, and it's one of quite a few. In fact, there are 8 different types of UFOs. Now it's very important, and I'm going to hold up some very rough pictures and show you this. There's this one and there's some others. We'll come up here if we can a bit. There's one down here, if you can walk down here, and we'll see this one here. A different one again, and another one that could be a UFO up here, and they keep varying. There are 8 in all, and none of them are the same. And what we found was this: the trick in working out what the UFOs are about is this glyph here. For me, this is the most important glyph on the wall, and I'll explain why. There is no glyph like this anywhere in Ray's book, and I'll talk about Ray's book later on. But what you have here is a combination of 3 different glyphs put together. These 4 dots here, if you take them out, I think it's about, in Ray's list, about 1,820 something, that represents Ireland. This glyph here, this represents, and there's a lot of these, it represents what I think is a boat. Now what you get with boats is the boats are given as a rectangle like this, then the function is given above. If there's a royal barge, there's a curve there, and then a rectangle above, and it says royal barge, and it tells us what the boat is like. But what's interesting is all glyph boats have nothing underneath. This one does. Now these 4 lines represent crystal. Now the crystal glyph is 4 lines like this, the rectangle, then 4 V's. But the V's are gone now, and we've now got these 4 dots. Now I read this as being a special sort of boat found in this island, which is the island of Australia, and here's the trick: made out of crystal. And that for me gives us the makedown of all these other 8 glyphs we've got spread all over the place there. They represent something. This tells us what it's made from, and I suspect that maybe, just maybe, this could represent the mothership. And all these different craft, all of them are different. There's no 2 the same. All 8 are different types of UFOs, and they've all been called UFOs by everybody. It's sort of a common description because it fits. The one down there, the one up there, the one I showed you, and the more up the other side there. I believe they could be something that's come out of this craft at some later stage, and we've got legends about a special spaceship hitting this atmosphere and exploding. We'll talk more about that later. A lot of Aboriginal people have dreaming stories and mythology about that. So we suspect this could be the mothership, shown as it was, made out of crystal, and all these ones are escape pods that have come out of it. Now we also think that the people who did this inscribed some messages on this wall, and these are ones that are reversed. And now when we go back to another site, I'll explain why it's reversed. I won't worry about that for now, but just trust me, it's reversed for a reason. But what is also interesting, that even some of the glyphs that were accepted as being normal, like here's the scarab beetle. Actually, the scarab beetle in hieroglyphs has 2 segments of the body. Here it's only got 1. So there's been a lot of changes here, but I think there've been changes being made simply because this is in a different place. And I suspect these glyphs were made before the Egyptians started making glyphs, and this may well have been the inspiration for it. Now down here you've got more of that story again. I see along the bottom here, I can see that complete story. But further up here I'm not as convinced that that's the same story again. It may well be that part of the story is merged into the older story. I'm not sure fully yet until we get a proper reading of it. But it seems to me like there are 2 different stories that are taking place there. Also, as we now know, up until about 20 years ago, the whole of these 2 walls were covered. And what we're standing on now is the actual ceiling as it collapsed. So this is actually part of a massive monument. And if you look up the far side there, you can still see 2 of the rocks that were part of that ceiling. Those rocks are sitting on top of other rocks that aren't naturally there. We'll look at that later. And you can see how that's fallen away now, is giving away at the moment. It's fallen halfway down there. Because when we go up there, there's more glyphs. We'll look at that next. So it's our take, there's two different stories here. And what's also quite interesting is where you're standing now. If you look back up there, you can see an upside down glyph there of another, what I think is a UFO. And notice again, we've got that upside down story. When you stand below, and I will right now, I'll stand below the camera person at the moment, you try and explain to me how, in God's name, any deranged Czech or any other person can get up to that top layer from here. It's impossible unless you bring in a lot of equipment. It's just impossible for me to even think about. If I stood on top of someone's shoulders, I would not get up to that top level there. And this is what people found when the deranged Czech that's supposed to have been here and the Sydney Uni students are supposed to have been here. This is the layout they stood on. So how they're supposed to have got up there is beyond my reckoning. I can't see how it could happen.
Steve, unless they were 13 feet tall or with two...
Well, you know what, 13 feet, you still got to hammer it in. You've got to try and get into that. I just can't see how it's going to happen. That glyph there, I have no idea what that is. No idea whatsoever. Alongside it, there we've got another one of these things. Now remember, the people who claim this is jewelry, if you could just focus on that for 1 second, I want you to look at something with a jewelry glyph and put it alongside this. It's a semicircle below and a line across there. Now the claim is, and I've read papers where they say that is jewelry. And one person has said, the reason why there's extra arms to give it extra luminescence. Scribes do not say, oh, I think I'll add to it and change it around unless they're directed from above. That has got nothing in common with jewelry. Now, as a result, it comes down to this. These UFOs, if that's what they are not in any of the accounts of glyphs at all. And to claim this is jewelry is ridiculous because it's got nothing in common. And you'll notice also we're supposed to have long beads hanging down like this, and all of these are supposed to have dots. Look at this. Dot, no dot. Dot, no dot. It doesn't fit. And what's really interesting about these is these glyphs are the only ones where if you see 6 of them, none of them are the same. Now, if you take the glyph for the hand pointing, and I just saw one up here a second ago. Here it is here. There's the hand pointing on this one. Now, if you go across there on this side, here's the hand again. They haven't changed it. It's exactly done the same way. There's no difference there. And you'll find the glyphs that are repeated identically. These are, for me, these different UFO glyphs are a clue. Now what we're also trying to find is somewhere in here, oh, there is one up here, I've seen it already, it's a different one to what I thought. This is very important too. There is a second one I can't find at the moment, I will. That's very important because this actually marks out what is called the etheric region. This is a marker of somewhere special. The etheric region, normally these glyphs are upside down representing the heavens. This is heaven on earth. It's been inscribed here. Now what is also interesting, go up to this one here. That is supposed to be the icon for fortress. And I've looked at all the icons for fortresses, and what they do, these represent ramparts and fortressing. Look at these two sides, they're left open. My suggestion is that whoever stayed here for a long period of time, whether this is done by the ancients from the UFOs or whether it's done by Lord Degeb, I don't know. But whoever was staying here, they built something, but they didn't need to completely seal it off. So they were not here as invaders. They were here in some sort of peaceful accord. And that seems quite obvious to me looking at that one. Now if we come up a bit further here, we can. You've got the famous ones. Okay, number one, up here. If you can, notice there's that hand signal again. And I want to talk about that because the cartouche denotes something special. That's the son of the god there, and I'll tell you a bit about this one here. That is Lord Degeb. That is his glyph. But what's really important, it needs to be understood. The Sieb, it can also be B. Now the reason I'm saying that is, what you need to understand is a lot of glyphs have 4 or 5 meanings. Now because so many of these symbols here, and Ray Johnson and Hans Dieter both said this, they left a lot out. They didn't understand them. They couldn't work out what they meant. My point is this: a lot of glyphs depend on the context around them to get the full meaning. If you're dropping out 1/3 of all the glyphs and saying, I don't understand, I'll leave them out, then I don't know that we've always got the right context here. You'll notice again, the hand is always pointing the right way. It's pointing the way it should. This is not all reversed. And here, what you've got here is a fairly long story of what took place here. Those 3 markers there, they talk about the drought that took place. This represents parched land. This is Lord Djeb. This is him here. That says he's the son of the Pharaoh. We know that for sure. This marks out south. And across here, it tells us more of the story of actually what took place. Now, all of this section up here is definitely to do with Lord Djeb, and it tells us all about his travails. This fella down here, I'm going to tell you for absolute definite. I've seen, John McGovern has sent me photographs over a period of time. This has been played with. Make no bones about this. People have been here and done things. This one here, people call this Anubis. It's not. It's sooty. It's not meant to be Anubis. And we think that people have engraved this cross here, but it should not be a cross, it should be an ankh. So they've messed around with this a bit, and there's a very good chance, in fact I know, that this has been played around with. Now my point is, whether it was originally in this shape and has been regraved is another story again. Now I want to show you one other one. This is the one that everyone, this is as close as you're going to get to jewelry. But you know, this is the closest of all the 8 UFOs to jewelry. But when I put up the side glyph jewelry again, there are problems with this again. Yes, we do have the semicircle the right way around, but if you look at the legs, we've got nothing in common again, because note, these legs are all the same. Shorter, longer, 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 then one without a dot again. And these things, which are supposed to hang down, and supposed to hang down much longer, are the same length as that, and that. So even of all the UFOs, the one that looks the closest to jewelry, at closer examination, if that's jewelry, the scribe had a very bad day with that one. Okay, and this, we'll talk about this later. That's a very interesting story which we'll talk about further on. That one there is a tally mark, I think, that tells us how long they've been here and breaks down the amount of time they've been at this place. And I think that's enough of that, really. I think we've covered that pretty well, to be honest. Oh, down here. Down here. This. Oh, we have to do this one. I find this particular one the most enigmatic of the lot. It is so separate from everywhere else. If you look above, it's at least 1 metre away from them and way away from that mob there. It's been put separately. Oh, and there's another one I've got to look at too, which really blew me away. I've just seen it. Now, some people say, oh, it's a woman giving birth. I've seen the glyphs and I've checked them, and it is nothing like a woman giving birth. And I'll tell you why. Because when a woman is giving birth, it comes out the bottom and it looks like she's actually giving birth. What's really interesting about this is, number one, there was one pharaoh that was portrayed in the non-stylized way we saw up there with the narrow waist and sideways, and that was Akhenaten, who had a pot belly. People have come on site, not me, and said, oh, that's Akhenaten. What is interesting about this is I suspect this is either Akhenaten, which is possible because this could be Akhenaten there, but this particular icon here is quite interesting because that icon all the way down represents a scepter, a sacred scepter. And you can see coming out of the stomach, something's coming out, and it looks like that scepter is formed into like a stick figure with the legs there, the arms there, and a bit of a head. It could be Akhenaten, and this could be some sort of concord or an agreement with the Aboriginal people. But it also could be more ancient. Is this a helmet? Is this more than a beard? Is this some sort of star person here? And this magic sacred staff with a human inside it, is that a genetic code? And that link coming out of the stomach and going into this symbol, does that mean that they're related in some way, that they've used their genes to manipulate and create something here? I don't know. But I can tell you one thing, it's been separate for a reason. Whether this is a third inscription that took place when Akhenaten was here to mark this out, because this stuff up here, Lord Djeb is 4,700 odd years, Akhenaten is another 1,000 years further towards us. And they were here for thousands of years. So it could be that, it could be Akhenaten, or it could be, and what's interesting is this guy doesn't have arms. That's a really fascinating one that needs to be looked at a lot more. But I can say one thing for sure, that I think there's a real clue with that, and we haven't come close to working that one out yet. Now, there was one other one I just saw when I was sitting around. Where is it? Ah, this. Have a look at this. I've seen bird icons, but nothing that goes like that. And look what goes above it. It's like you've got a bird there, then they've superimposed a second bird on top, and then it's got this sort of mouth arrangement there. There is nothing close to that in any of the glyphs at all. I don't know what that is. I've seen this part quite a few times, but nothing like that. There's the head, and it looks like a second bird has gone on top of the first one. That again, as I said, these particular symbols that have been left out of the translation, I think, notice how this one's kept away a bit too. I think they've been put there because they're very important markers within this translation. And you take these sort of markers and that one out of this translation, what you have is some of the story, but you can't have all of it. There's too much that's missing.
Well, in Akhenaten's reign, he changed everything around and decreed that there were no gods to be worshipped, and only the truth was to be worshipped. And so he ordered all the people to take their clothes off and be naked, so there was nothing to be hidden. Just like Australian Aborigines.
And of course, the year after, if I can add to that, we've since found out that Akhenaten's son, Tutankhamun, the gold that is found inside the tomb of Tutankhamun has a signature which can be traced back to Australia, in fact Ballarat. So the possibility that that is Akhenaten is quite strong. It's probably greater than the potential it's a genetic code, but I'm not prepared to go either way on that one. It could even be both. It could go both ways. Right, I feel this could be the most important set of glyphs in the whole of this story. As Bina just pointed out, you'll find this is much more ancient and looks a lot older than some of the stuff on the other side, which is far more heavily inscribed in. What's important about this is I know what the translation for this is. The translation is this is supposed to be holy, and this is supposed to represent a place, and this is supposed to be a shining one. Now I said before, the person who did this glyph said, this is jewelry. Now we know it isn't, and what he said was they put extra arms to make it even more shiny. I don't believe that's what it is. I actually think there's a story that begins back here, where you have your first UFO, then we have a glyph that nobody can recognise, there's nothing like it at all. Then you have a different form of UFO, and I'll talk about that in a sec too. This looks to me like someone has actually got some sort of control here, with the larger ship here. And now this is supposed to be holy. Now they say shining, I think this is holy, and I think this relates to this, which relates to that, and that. And what I should add there right now is Uncle Reuben Kelly's story, a Dunghutti man. And he gave us a story, and I've got the quote, and I'll see if I can get it word for word. And he said that we came from a spaceship, and it obviously comes from Pleiades, we know that back to front, and when the spaceship hit the atmosphere, it exploded and turned into crystals. Now my belief is that yes it did, and what we're looking at here are different escape pods. And notice they're all different shapes, and we've got some upside down again, we've seen them before, which gives us that esoteric story and the story of Thoth again. This for me, 1, 2, 3 UFOs in a row, next to a glyph we do not understand, and a glyph that means holy. That for me is really a very, very deep story, and of course below that we've got an icon that means the stars. That one there pointing down, even though that bit's gone, that represents the sky again. So I've got sky there, or stars there, I've got a UFO there, I've got one there, and I've got one there, and someone that looks like they're sitting in some sort of control panel, and it looks like they're steering. If that isn't a story about UFOs, I don't know what is. Now, I'm just checking one thing there. Let's go in that way. Put the wrong way around. If I reverse it, oh look, up there. That's one reversed too. Notice that's also been reversed. I think this is some of the more, oh look, here's a UFO upside down. You've got that reversed up there, you've got this one upside down. There's that reversing we've been talking about, and we'll get to what that means later on. There's so many cryptic clues here. The idea it's a fake falls on its backside with that alone. Why were National Parks and Wildlife going to so much trouble to fill up something that was bogus? Some people have said this is a birthing channel for Aboriginal women, and I know that's not true because Aboriginal women squatted when they gave birth. A lot of people, not myself, but a lot of others have claimed this is a mummification table. And the logic behind it's not bad, because what they claim is that when mummification took place, all the bodily fluids, the body didn't sit in it, it had to run away, which is what that would provide. And secondly, we're far enough away from where he's interred down near the glyphs, because you do the mummification not on site where they're being buried, taken away somewhere, then taken back to that particular place to be put inside and put into a crypt. I suspect, I'm going with a mummification table. I think that's probably what it is. When it was made, I don't know, but I just can't see what else it can be but that, particularly when you stand above it. So look, it could be natural, but I don't think so. What people have said, those who've looked at it, have all claimed mummification table. Its proximity to the glyphs, its proximity to all the other things we've seen there, it leads into that. I don't know what else it could be. Now what I find really interesting is, yes, we have ridging coming up in sandstone. There's a little bit over there where Fiona's standing at the moment, but it's not uniform. What you've got here is a lip that runs all the way down here. I have no doubt it came around here, it's come away there, comes back up here, it's picked up here, raised above again, and lifted up here, it's gone above here, and I think that ridging went all the way around and held this, encased this whole structure, whatever it is. Particular engraving here is referred to as Bulgandri. It's very famous in this region. In fact, it's probably the most famous engraving in the whole of this region. It's the first engraving found at Umina that sets out an historical timeline. The whole of this platform is referred to as a Bulgandri rock platform, and nobody really understands what it's about. It is not what they think it is. It's something far more important and much more esoteric. Okay. So we've got the moon over here, and by the way, that's not a boomerang. I've actually seen a copy of this done by W.D. Campbell, and he did it in about 1896, when this is much more defined, and it's definitely always circular. It's a complete circle. It's a crescent moon on this side. They've made a mistake to call it a boomerang, and it's not. The rays coming out of the top of his head, I think, indicate wisdom, some sort of great wisdom. Across there, he balances the sun and the moon. Now that's really important, and I want to read a couple of quotes from the book of Hermes. Now Hermes is a reincarnated form of Thoth. Now Thoth we found engraved as part Duramil and part Thoth all over the place, and we'll talk about that later, but it's a common theme. We found icons for Thoth all around here, and I want to read what the book of Hermes says about the way Thoth introduces his wisdom and knowledge, and it reads like this: "Indeed, the appearance of the sun and the moon are omniform, rather like our mirrors that produce the likeness through refraction and brilliance. The importance of this is the mirror reflection and the duality of the seasons. I have already told you of the mirror reflection of the moon." Now the reason I'm bringing this up is when we go to the glyphs, we see this mirror reflection in what I think is the more esoteric part of the story. We've seen the UFOs upside down, we've seen death, we've seen stars upside down, and here, if this is Thoth, and we found Thoth all over the place, and he's directing us towards the glyphs, which he is, then his secret should be written as a mirror reflection. And I feel that this is a very important part of the Gosford glyphs, simply because this gives us the key and the author of what we see as the older part of this story. The boat, which you can see running all the way across there, Auntie Minnie told me this is to represent he comes from afar, from a distant place, He was not part of this group. Yes, this is an Aboriginal carving that was done by Aboriginal men, and maybe women too. I'm not sure about that because I don't know the site that well. But certainly, without a doubt, it's the same story of Thoth in a different way. And you'll also notice there, if you look very carefully, the same apparent markers take place. There's a circle here, another sun disk, a large one, a smaller one over here. Maybe that's marking the time he came. And if you look at that disc over there, there's something coming out of it again. Again, this is another part of this mysticism we haven't quite read. What I can tell you for sure is what it isn't. If that's a shield, that is the worst shield an Aboriginal person has made in their life. It will not deflect anything, and he will die the first time it's used. If that's a boomerang, it's the worst boomerang ever made because it's made perfectly round, and that's not how they turn out. And if that's a woomera, the spears he's carrying have got to be 15 foot high. It's a ridiculous concept. It is a sword. It's a broadsword. This is part of this Egyptian story. Whether it's more ancient, I don't know, but we can certainly tick off the word Egyptian. If we want to throw the word alien in later on, that's a maybe. But there's no doubt Ani Mini is absolutely sure this is an Egyptian icon that's been engraved here because he's revered. And this is something that's very important in this story. The Egyptians came here for that, the esoteric wisdom. I've been told by elder after elder, they came here to learn the mystical, to learn the things that they didn't understand. They were technologically superior to the Aboriginal people. When it comes to spiritual matters, they were apprentices, and these were their masters. This guy is special. I believe this is Thoth, and I'll have a look at these two lines across here. Is that a helmet? I don't know, but we don't have a neck. That's intentional. We have no neck here. So it's a spiritual story with a broadsword, and as we know, the Aboriginal people never had broadswords, they never had metal, and a huge boat that runs all the way down as far as you can see. It's part of that same story again. There's a very good chance here, the more we look at these legs, the more obvious it becomes to me. If you look at the leg on the far side there, it's got that club foot that I expect. On the other side, you've got the longer leg. Now, Duramulin, who is called the son of Byami, and we need to understand Byami is called not a god but a sky hero. So he's the son of the sky hero, must be shown with one club foot and one long leg. Now every engraving we found around here where we've got an ibis head or a monkey head, which is the two incarnations of Thoth, always we have the two legs like this. This has got the same two legs. This to me is even another indication, like the other 4 engravings I've found around here where I've seen markings of Thoth, this has got to be Thoth again. Now I know other people have said it could be Thoth, they were right. I also have got no doubt those 2 markings there, those sun discs there. I know where there's another engraving like this elsewhere, and there's the same sort of markings again with the same 2 sun discs right alongside on the left hand side. Too many coincidences here. Okay, this particular object, while we're talking about Ani Mini, I really should mention these 2 objects. This object here was actually worn as jewellery by son of Ani Milli's relations. If you look at the top there, you'll see part of a round clasp. Originally, they put a chain through there and it was worn around the neck. And they wore this for quite some time until quite recently the clasp came away. Now what's interesting about this particular piece of jewellery is flat on one side, and on the other side, I think I can see a figure with a foot here, and then a knee coming up like that. I've had a look at the glyphs there, and there's two, one for music and one for scribe, that come awful close. What's particularly interesting about this particular glyph, this particular pendant, is number one, the foot's back to front again. It's reversed. The foot should be on this side, not that side, so we've got that reversing again. And secondly, when you hold this, it is incredibly light. And we know, Ani Mini's told me, they've had a look at this, there's no iron ore, there's no lead, which means it's not post-Cook. It's got to be something older. This was found between the 2 walls of the Gosford glyphs, and it was found covered and encrusted in debris. Ani Mini said it took her half an hour to clean this up and to find the glint underneath there. She didn't even know what it was. She saw a little bit of a glint and cleaned this up. This was found between the 2 walls, and it's possible this may well have been Nefertari's necklace, which is, by the way, mentioned in the story there, or it could even be older. What was also found was this. This particular object here, she thought it could be the bone of Nefertari. Now what I've done since then is I went to a hospital I can't mention at the moment because they asked me to keep quiet about this. I went to the fractures unit, and the gentleman who looked at this said, this is very light, very ancient, and could be a femur bone. He then said, but you won't know until you get a CAT scan. I had a CAT scan done from the hospital, who I can't mention at the moment because they actually did this for free and I couldn't pay for it. And their comment was, it has the same density as bone. So from one expert I've got, it could be a femur bone, which is the hip bone, the top piece there, that's the piece that locks in. And from another expert I've got, it has got the same density as a bone. Since this was found between the two walls of the glyph, along with this, Auntie Minnie found both of them, has kept them under custodianship for about 15-20 years until she gave it to me. I would suggest to you there's a fairly good chance this is another part of that ancient Egyptian story. I can tell you one thing, Aboriginal people do not forge metal. And because this was found deep in the dirt between the two glyphs, it would seem by association and proximity, it must be part of that same story. Now knowing the glyphs are legitimate, surely that legitimizes this. We suspect when we feel it, it's very, very light, that it feels like aluminium. But that's tricky because we need 600 to 700 degrees to make that. So there's a technology there we're still chasing up. Another part of that same story. Okay, also found, apart from Auntie Minnie, what she found, there was another person, two people actually, Dan Collins and Hans Dieter von Senth. When they found the other set of hieroglyphs, about 25 of them in 2 stone tablets, beneath it they found this. This is actually a basalt chisel with little specks of what's called an olivite inside there. Now what's fascinating about that is Hans has had this looked at by a gemologist, and he still should have a geologist to look at it, but even so, what the gemologist said is the basalt most likely, and I'll use the words he used, originated in Egypt. And olivite is common, prevalent throughout Egypt. So this is another part of the things that have been picked up around these particular hieroglyphs to validate what that's also about. Leave that. We seem to have 5 areas that have turned up. 3, I believe, are factual and can't be contested. 2, I think, are very, very close. The first thing we found for sure is this place and this whole region has got astronomy. It's got all forms of astronomy. The oldest astronomy in the world is found at a place called Wurdi Youang, which is in Victoria. Around here, above the glyphs, directly above it, in a 300 metre grid, we found over 50 astronomical markers. Graham, and they were done as a circle. When we went up and saw Graham, further up in the Katoomba region, we found emu prints, which are also astronomical markers. I've seen constructions of 15,000 and 50,000 rocks that mark out certain alignments and solstices. All around Australia, these people were astronomers from way, way back. We need that skill, because when the Ramengeri told me they circumnavigated the world in a figure 8 in ancient times, you have to have astronomy to circumnavigate. That is a given. The second thing I now believe is a given is that the Egyptians were here. Elder after elder has told me the same story. To be honest, up until I saw David and Auntie Bev, we had 60 pieces of evidence that illustrated the Egyptians were here. I had that marked down as 51. After talking to David, and David is an honourable man. He's not a liar. I've spoken to him. You can see it in his eyes. This man is doing this for no other reason than getting the truth out. Auntie Bev tells us that the ancient Egyptians were here, and then I find out something I didn't know. I knew they came here for a pilgrimage. I knew they came here to learn about the esoteric ways and the mysticism the Aboriginal people knew about. Now I find out that Auntie Bev tells us that the more older glyphs are theirs. They had a written language. So that starts to evolve even more. And another thing we found, we can put that down as a definite. The third thing I found now is when I spoke to John Burns, one of the top geologists in this country, we spoke about Eugene Stockton's discovery of an axe, a stone pebble chopper. which is at least 60,000 years and maybe 110,000 years. I've seen another one of those Angel John Gallard picked up from the Snowy Mountains, which he dates between 60 to 100,000 years. And here's the problem with that. The Out of Africa theory has Africans turning up in Australia at the very top end 60,000 years ago, and here we have tool sites both in Penrith and the Snowy Mountains of things that were made by human beings that are 60, 80, 100,000 years old. The Out of Africa theory is wrong. As the Aboriginal people have told us time after time, they are the first people. For me, those three things are given. The next two are in the probability category. The first is the melting of rocks. I've seen this everywhere, and person after person has said it to me. I haven't prompted them. They've said, I see melted rocks. At Butterbox, the drain that we've seen, the drain is actually, it's been formed and it's been melted, and the lips are 68 centimetres, and through the whole of that region we see melted rock. John Burns said that the drain that we actually seen, and I'll use the words he gave me and allowed me to use, is not like anything else he's ever seen. He's not prepared to say it's man-made, but he's gone very close towards that. The mummification table we saw, I believe that's been melted. Graham's first site, I believe that rock's been melted. And I think we're going to find all the way around. And remember when we did an interview with Mark and he spoke about those 4 table legs. And I said to him later, I'd show him the picture of the drain at Butterbox. Later on I did. And he said that the coloration and the form of that rock was exactly the same again. Now here comes the tricky part of the equation. Who melted the rock? Now, we've written 4 books. We haven't mentioned this word. We've had 20 articles published and we've never mentioned this word. But now we're going to start talking about UFOs and Pleiades. I don't have a choice here. David Fitzgerald spoke about the cave of extraterrestrials. The elders have said time after time, they've pointed to the sky and said, we came from Pleiades. They've said that to me so many times. The Ramanjeri told me, one day you will have to talk about this. Uncle Reuben Kelly, the last Dunghutti elder that was cutting boys, said way back, he said we came in a spaceship, and when the spaceship came to the earth, it shattered and exploded and turned into crystal. Arnie Bev speaks about the explosion. Graham speaks about this explosion and says that the dreaming stories all over the state talk about this. So we're starting to get a different story coming up here. When we looked at Martin's compass, you need to understand that compass is off by about 15 to 20 degrees. We need to think, how far do we go back before that's aligned? And I'm suspecting we're going back more than thousands. We're going back tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of years before we'll find that alignment. And then we've got the walls at Gosford with the 8 UFOs. The only glyph that keeps changing every time. No 2 of those glyphs are the same. It is not jewellery. There's nothing like that. I believe that's an account of something that took place a long, long time ago. Now with the UFOs, I'm prepared to say I'm 95 to 99% convinced that UFOs are part of this story. But it doesn't matter if they're not. The Egyptians were part of this story. The astronomy is part of this story, and they are the first people. But the sad part of this equation is this. With all these facts, and we're going to come back down more, and I've got another 5 sites I'm going to look at later. With all these facts, the central point, I believe, are the glyphs and the area around Karyong. And this is what really worries me. The land is for sale, and the authorities don't care. The land should not be for sale, and the authorities should take notice of this place. This place changes history and it changes paradigms. The question we've got to ask is, why did the Egyptians spend, I think, over 4,000 years sailing to this place? What were they seeking? And I can tell you now, it's still here. The wisdom of these elders has never gone away. They spent 4,000 years chasing this up. We've been here for 200 years and we haven't asked. We need to ask what it is they've got, and they'll share it with us. And we need to honour the places where they've shown this today. And as it stands, as I'm standing here right now, if you go back up to where the Gosford glyphs are, as you pull up there, you'll see a massive sign saying for sale, and underneath it there's a sign saying under negotiation. That cannot continue.